Hi, welcome to Quietly Thinking Out Loud. I've been helping an organization build its culture, so I have a lot of interesting conversations from leaders and staff members. And there was something rather interesting. It's the relationship between silence and speaking up. I suppose this thought came from looking back at different stages of my own life and noticing how much our environment shapes the way we communicate. Growing up, I was the youngest child in a rather traditional Thai family, and I think without anyone needing to explain it directly, there was always an invisible hierarchy in the household. The younger ones listened, the older ones spoke first. You waited for your turn, or sometimes you simply listened. Looking back now, I think that environment shaped me more than I realized. I became someone who naturally observed first, listened carefully, and only spoke when I felt there was something necessary to say. And at the time, I never questioned it. It was simply the room I grew up in. Those were the rules I quietly learned. And then years later, I joined an international company in Hong Kong. I remember one particular moment very clearly. And it was my first month with them. I was still adjusting. And one day I was asked to meet the boss. And before the conversation, he asked me to take an English test, even though I did that before I moved to Hong Kong. The result was good, not excellent, but it was good enough. I thought we would be discussing language capability. Instead, he spoke about something entirely different. He explained that in the company, performance was not only about doing the work well, people were expected to participate, to contribute ideas, to speak. I remember telling him quite honestly that I understand what people are saying. I feel clear about the discussion. I know what to do, and I simply have nothing to add. And I remember that he laughed, not critically, but kindly. And then he said, eventually, you will find what to say. I still remember walking away from that conversation and thinking, another bridge to cross. So I did what I usually do. I self-study before the internet because it's quite a long time ago. So I watched films, I read books, I practiced reading out loud. And I remember my flatmate was laughing, but joining me doing all that. And looking back now, it feels rather funny because it wasn't simply about improving my English. I was learning something much bigger. I was learning how to work with people from different countries, different accents, different communication styles. It was probably my earliest lesson about diversity, not diversity as a corporate word like it's being used nowadays, but diversity in how human beings think, process, and participate. Many years later, when I eventually became head of HR, I often thought back to those early experiences. And back then, companies used the term induction program. Nowadays, I think people called it onboarding. And for me, it was never simply about introducing policies, employee benefits, or showing new employees where things were. I believe people needed something more important. They needed to understand the invisible rules. What kind of culture does the company value? How are decisions made here? What behaviors are expected? And what does success actually look like beyond technical or functional performance? Because I learned very early in my own career that sometimes people struggle not because they are incapable, but because no one explained the environment, no one explained the game. And over the years, I found myself becoming more patient with people, perhaps because I understood what it feels like to enter unfamiliar rooms. I remember conducting workshops in different countries, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and many others. And I could often see the hesitation in participants, not because they lacked ideas, but because English was not their first language. I could almost see the process happening in their heads because I've been there before, listening, translating internally, trying to understand context, trying to find the right words. And perhaps because I remember being that person myself, I never rushed them. Instead, I let my inner child came out to play. A little humor, a lighter atmosphere, something to help people relax enough to participate. And I learned that silence doesn't always mean people have nothing valuable to say. Sometimes they simply need more time. And perhaps all these experiences slowly taught me something about human relationships as well. Because in workshops, meetings, organizations, things are usually clearer. There are objectives, business goals, expected outcomes. Even disagreement often return to clarity, agree or disagree in a professional manner. But for personal relationships are far more complicated because emotions are involved, a history is involved, attachment is involved, and often we stop saying things not because we don't care, but precisely because we care. We stay quiet because we don't want to hurt someone close to us, a partner, spouse, friend, family member. We tell ourselves that perhaps they will understand, perhaps they will notice, or perhaps they will adjust, without us having to say anything uncomfortable. And life has taught me something else. when we choose not to speak about something important, silence itself becomes communication, because the other person may interpret our silence very differently. They may assume everything is fine. They may assume certain behaviors are acceptable. They may assume boundaries do not exist. And so, little by little, things begin to accumulate. Disappointment, misunderstanding, unspoken expectations, quiet frustration, and eventually resentment. Real silence begins to take place. My years managing people taught me another lesson. Sometimes timing matters as much as the message itself. In leadership, if someone is moving in the wrong direction, you don't wait until the year-end performance review to address it, because by then 12 months have already passed. The habits have already formed. The damage may already be done. I often think relationships work the same way too. Sometimes we notice something early, a small discomfort, a boundary that quietly crossed, a behavior that doesn't sit well with us. But instead of saying something, we wait. And often silence gives problems time to grow roots. And now when I say we should speak up, I don't mean becoming harsh or confrontational or saying everything impulsively. I've learned over the years that there are ways to communicate difficult things carefully. Words matters. Timing also matters. Tone also matters. Understanding the other person matters too. So we can be honest without being cruel. We can set boundaries without attacking. We can communicate clearly without damaging connection. And perhaps what life has taught me is this: silence and speaking are both choices. There are moments when silence protects peace, when emotions need time to settle, when listening matters more than reacting. But there are also moments when silence protects something else, a misunderstanding, an unhealthy pattern, a repeated behavior, a slowly growing resentment, a problem that quietly becomes bigger because no one was willing to address it early enough. So perhaps the question is not simply, should I say something? Perhaps the better question is, what is my silence protecting? Peace or the problem itself? Because sometimes silence serves wisdom, and sometimes silence stops protecting peace and starts protecting the problem instead. Something that I think it's worth thinking about. Well, thank you for being here with me. Until next time, take care.